Okay, so on this one, we're going to talk about parallel lines and transversals. So kind of what we were talking about in the last video, but this one's going to be more over 3.2. So just in case you guys want to get this out and get ready, we're going to be talking about parallel lines and transversals. Okay. You can also look at the October 21st notes, all right? But this is something very particular, and it's going to be pretty fast and pretty easy. So I'm going to draw these two lines, okay? And these two lines, we're going to assume that they're parallel, okay? So if I wanted to say that these two lines are parallel, I have like a little indicator, right? Those say that those two lines are parallel, and we're going to create ourselves a transversal, okay? Let's go ahead and let's call this line A, and we'll call this one line B, and we'll call our transversal, let's go ahead and call it T for transversal, right? We know that we have certain angles and certain positions available based on these drawings, right? So I want you to really focus on the two things. Whenever I say parallel and parallel lines and transversals, one thing I really, really want you guys to focus on is these things: acute and obtuse. You'll always notice one thing about this type of stuff. You're either going to have an acute angle or an obtuse angle. Okay, unless the lines are perpendicular, unless the transversal is perpendicular, you should always have one of the two angles. And the great thing, because they're parallel, all of the acute angles are congruent. Isn't that great? That means this angle is congruent to this angle and this angle and this angle. All of your acute angles are congruent to each other, right? That should be pretty awesome. With that being said, all of your obtuse angles are also congruent to each other, right? That's the one thing that you want to focus on, okay? And this only works when the lines are parallel, okay? So the reason why I say this, and I want to make sure that you guys understand this, is that when we say specific things about corresponding angles, consecutive, and all that stuff, all those type of angle relationships, that's what we're using it on. Okay, so let's go ahead and label these angles: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Right? Okay. What I'm trying to tell you is that I know angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. I know angle 3 is congruent to angle 6, and angle 6 is congruent to angle 7, right? Because the lines are parallel. Okay. You need to know the relationships. Okay. Hopefully, on the last video in 3.1, you understood the relationships. But real quick reminder: angle 1 and angle 5 are corresponding. Look, they're both obtuse, so that means they're congruent. Okay. Check this out. Angles 8 and angles 4 are both obtuse. Guess what? They're corresponding angles. They're congruent. Okay. Now look at this. Angle 6 and angles 3, those are both acute. They're congruent. Why are they congruent? Because they're alternate interior angles. Okay, so this is what you want to focus on. Okay, anytime the lines are parallel, okay, I don't know why I still have this mask on. But anytime the lines are parallel, you have acute and obtuse angles. And the acute angles are always congruent to acute angles, and obtuse angles are always congruent to obtuse angles. Now, with that being said, what if you have an acute angle and an obtuse angle? For instance, what if I had a question that asked about angle 6 and angle 4, right? Here I have an obtuse angle and an acute angle. I know they're not congruent. So what I do in this situation, guess what? I make it so that they're supplementary. Okay, and supplementary means they add up to 180 degrees. So I would take angle 6 and I take angle 4, I add them together, and I would set them equal to 180 degrees. Pretty reasonable, right? I hope so. Okay, so let's do a problem that discusses what we just talked about, right? Okay, let's say that I said angle 4 is equal to, I don't know, 110 degrees, right? Let's think about these measures, right? Angle 4 is 110 degrees. you should be able to, based on the fact that these two lines are parallel to each other, right? Based on the fact that those two lines are parallel to each other, you should be able to tell me that angle 5 is 110 degrees. You should be able to tell me that angle 8 is 110 degrees. And you should be able to tell me that angle 1 is 110 degrees, right? All the obtuse angles are congruent. Well, what if it asks for angle 6, right? What if it asks for angle 6? Well, guess what? We know that obtuse and acute angles, when lines are parallel, are supplementary. That means they add up to 180 degrees, right? So if this angle is 110 degrees, that means this angle is 70 degrees, which means I can then fill in the rest of the information for all of my acute angles. Isn't that awesome? And that is the biggest key when you're talking about transversals and parallel lines. Obtuse angles are congruent to obtuse angles. Acute angles are congruent to acute angles. Okay. And if you have one obtuse and one acute, they're supplementary. They add up to 180 degrees. And that's the key part about knowing about parallel lines. Now, understanding the relationships is really important too. Okay. And I'm going to leave the angle measures on all of these, right? Just so you see what the relationship is. Okay. All right. So I'm leaving all the angle measures on, and I'm going to go ahead and do the angles. Okay. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Notice angle 1 and angle 5, right? Angle 1 and angle 5 is what I want you to focus on. Those two angles are congruent, right? Why are they congruent? Because they're corresponding angles. They're also obtuse. Okay. And you'll notice that all of the corresponding angles are congruent. Angles 3 and 7, 8 and 4, 6 and 2, right? They're all congruent to each other. I'm leaving the angle measures there, right? So you should see that they're all congruent to each other. Okay. All right. Now look at your alternate exterior, angle 1 and 8. They're congruent to each other. Angles 2 and 7, they're congruent to each other. So your alternate exterior angles are also congruent. Congruency means equality. They're equal, right? Okay. So this is one thing to focus on when you're doing these types of angles. And that's it.